Hey nerds, are you ready for math? Oh man. So a lot of you guys, I know a lot of you are struggling to summon and things like that. And I've been seeing people toss around the fact that, oh man, there's so many 5 stars in the pool now, it's just impossible to pull the thing that you really want. And admittedly, I can kinda see that, but I figured we'd dive into the math, give you guys an idea of how summoning works, and how, well, chances are you may not. And I'm just going to give you a basic overview of math and how things, work in summoning pools, okay? At least how it's distributed. So let's pull up an image. I actually had to take up, make sure that I had a summon that actually had all colors represented. Oh boy, that was a fun one. And then eventually I just gave up and went and got the wiki picture of it. Perfect stuff. So, I don't think people properly understand just how orb distribution works, because when it comes to summoning, there is such a thing as orb distribution, because it's not random. When you go to summon, it isn't just because, oh man, here's a bunch of random colors you get to pick from. No, there's actually a bit of science to this and how it works. Mostly, all of the colors that end up showing up on your pool are mostly due to, well, distribution of units. Typically, there are, well, more chances of certain colors than there are of others. That's because, well, let's just pull up the numbers, okay? So, we're going to use we're going to use the certain recent banner, of course, the Halloween Trick or Defeat, and give you a basic idea of how certain things show up. So, here are the current orb distributions for Trick or Defeat. As you can see, the top is of course red. That is because, well, there are a ton of red units in the game. Like, tons. And of course, because of that, there typically tend to be more red orbs that show up. And as you can see here, well, 29.74% is the most, and the least likely to appear are green orbs at 18.76. This, of course, is because there is a extreme disparity between how many red units there are in the game and how many green are. Granted, as we go along, you'll start to see that there's variations in it. Not every pool has the same distribution rate. That's because when it comes to focus units, typically, well, it will factor in that. When you're adding a focus unit, they tend to have a little bit more oomph to it, and because of that, distribution changes slightly every summon banner. And as you can see here, we tend to have more focus on, well, at least for this banner, reds, greens, and colorless. There are technically no blue, but still blue has a chance of showing up because there are, again, quite a lot of blue units in the game. But you'll typically be seeing a lot more colorless and red, and occasionally the off green. That's typically why you see green units a lot less, or at least green orbs a lot less, is because orb distribution is stacked more in favor of red, colorless, and blue. Which, by the end of it, kind of sucks, and in fact, not the best, but hey, I guess that's just typically how this game works in that favor. So, let's talk about, say, what would be the perfect banner? What is exactly the right mixture to create a better summoning ratio? Well, typically, I know people complain, oh god, they only gave us 3 units for this banner, kind of deal. Well, actually, when it comes to summoning, you actually probably want a banner that is a little bit smaller, more self-contained, because, well, the smaller the banner, the better chance of a unit. Just to give you an example, we'll go into Ira, okay? Ira's banner came out 3 units. In fact, 2 of them were red, and yet, somehow, the chances of them appearing at 3% is actually a lot higher than you would expect. So I'm going to show you the math here. As you can see here, right from this list, you can see that, well, Ira and Eldigan have a fairly decent, not a most amazing, obviously. This is, of course, your rate at a 3% appearance rate, the bare minimum, the start, the default. And as you can see, Ira has a 3.21 3.8% chance of showing up. Eldigan has a 3.32% chance of showing up. That's technically because Eldigan is also in the non-focus unit list, so he has a little bit of a better percentile of showing up than Ira does. Meanwhile, Lachesis is over there in her 4% glory, and that only goes up from there. And that kind of gives you an idea. Typically, when it comes down to a summoning banner, you usually want units that are evenly distributed, at least around the colors, and you usually want a pool that has only 3 or so units, because that means you have a higher chance of pulling those units. Just to give you an example, and it's not going to be shown here, Minerva, who is recently in the Flyers banner, actually has a 5% chance of showing up at a appearance rate at 3, because, well, she's a green unit, and green units tend to show up more often. That just gives you an example. Now, if we were to, say, take a look at Trick or Defeat, that is going to show you that typically you're going to have a lesser chance of actually pulling some of the more focused units because, well, they're not as evenly distributed, and there's an extra unit in the focus list. So, let's give you an example, shall we? Here is Trick or Defeat's summon rates at 3% appearance rates. As you can see, the most common unit you will get if you were to aim for him would probably be Henry. He has a 4% chance at green. That is quite a bit, considering. And then, of course, we quickly go downhill from there. From there, we, of course, have Jacob and Sakura, who both have a 2.87% chance of showing up in their summon pool. And people oftentimes say Colorless Hell is the worst. But technically, no, there's actually more of a chance of a red hell, in a sense, in the fact that Naui, since she is the only red there, and there are so many red units in the game, she actually has the least amount of chance to show up at 2.52% at a 3% appearance rate. Yeah, that just kind of shows you the examples of how things are going. Now, when it came to past banners, there's always changes. There's always a chance of things like this. As I said, when it comes to banners, usually what you want are the lower ones, the ones that are smaller, that have less units in them, and are a bit more evenly distributed. Again, Minerva in the recent Flyers banner, you have a 5.41% chance of pulling. Sheeta in that one, 3.43, and of course Hinoka has a 4% chance of showing up at a appearance rate of 3%. So, technically when it comes to banners, again, less is more. Another example, of course, is evenly distributed would be World of the Holy War, which was, it's ended now, sad times, but technically we had Sigurd, who was there, 3.32, again, kind of like Eldigan. And then, of course, Deirdre was at 5%, and Teltiu was at 3%. And you get the basic example here, right? Chances are it's less about the summoning pool expanding. Sure, that kind of sucks. I mean, Naui is in a terrible spot to actually pull her. She's actually one of the worst units to pull for in this right now. However, the chances are you'll be seeing more red orbs. Again, if we go all the way back to, distribution, just to give you an example of this banner, you can kind of, well, see that you're going to get more red orbs. So the chances of her spawning up are much more, well, I wouldn't say often or of an occurrence, it's just more likely. But if you do happen to get a green orb or aim for the green orbs, chances are you will get Henry a lot more, because that's just simply how things work. His orbs typically don't spawn as much, but if you do get green orbs and you go for them, you'll have a higher percentile of it. Granted, there's also, of course, I made fun of the fact that now he's technically in a red hell in a way, but, of course, colorless have their own thing going on. Chances are, if you do get a if someone does break your pity rate, at least when you're going for Naui, you might find them a little bit more useful. But it's really an odd thing to look at when it comes to summon rates and how they work. but I figured that would just give you a rundown of what's going on, because summon rates are odd, and they're such an interesting little thing to talk about when it comes to how units work and how they're distributed. However, when it comes to units right now, the math isn't really terribly obtuse, and usually, again, when it comes to banners, people complain about the lack of numbers, or, people feel that numbers are a little bit less because, oh man, there's only 3 units, but actually, 3 units or less are actually pretty good. I don't think we'll ever do a 2-hero banner, but, with 3 units, you'll have a bit of a better chance. And unfortunately, with Trick or Defeat, we have 4, and the only one who really has a great rate of actually being summoned, if you were to get it, would be Henry. So, there's a bit of math for you guys, just to give you an example of how things work, and I hope that gives you a bit of a better understanding of how things are. I'm not even talking about how, orbs, when they spawn, how they roll for things. Typically, just to give you an idea, when these orbs spawn, they kind of go down the list. They start off, they check to see if focus summons are going to spawn, and if you don't hit that, it goes on to non-focused 5 stars, and then it goes down to 4 stars, and then it goes down to 3 stars, and then it just kind of, that's at least from what I understood, but I could be terribly wrong with that. I'm just mostly talking about the math. But every time you get an orb, it rolls for it, and it's just up to luck, and once it's on the field here, it's predestined. There's no rolling in between it. The character that you get there was destined to show up on that orb for that color the instant you pulled up the field. So don't go like, oh man, I got really lucky by summoning on this. Yeah, you might have, but it was kind of gonna happen. It was already there. So, anyways. Just figured I would talk to you guys about summoning rates and fun stuff like that, so catch you next